I call this meeting to order. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank all of you for coming this evening. Please take attendance.
Councilmember Tilton Byrne is absent this evening. We've got 6 other council members present.
Thank you. Item 3, approval of the agenda. Entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Please call the roll.
Avery?
Aye.
Collins?
Aye.
Duran?
Aye.
Niemeyer?
Aye.
Specker?
Aye.
Wendell?
Aye.
Motion passes. Open forum. Is there any member of the public who wish to address the council on an item not listed on tonight's agenda? Seeing none, we'll move on. Item 5, presentation on clothing and fabric sustainability. Vice Chair of the Sustainability Council, Albert Patan, will introduce this item for us.
All right, good evening. So today we're going to talk about some of the challenges that we see in sustainability of clothing and my name is Albert Patan.
I was going to say, I don't want to cut you off, Albert. You might want to speak into the mic a little bit louder.
Okay.
It's a green light on, first of all.
Name is Albert Patan. Green light is on.
Okay.
Today we're here to talk about fabric sustainability and some of the challenges that we look at from an environmental sustainability. So when we look at the industry studies show that textile industries is a significant contributor to the global economy, creating millions of livelihoods across the world. In doing so, it does present some environmental challenges. And so really this presentation is designed to cover certain elements. First element that we're going to look at is carbon emissions associated with the garment industry. Second element we're going to look at is microfiber release into the environment and how those the clothing and manufacturing processes. We're going to look at garments and landfills and the effects that these garments and landfills have. We're going to talk about some of the challenges that are associated with recycling of garments, especially newer blends and newer fiber orientations and materials. We're going to look at some of those roadblocks in a little bit more depth in regards to that recyclability. And we're all going to talk about what we can do at a local level, who can act to reduce emissions and waste productions, and tips that can be used by citizens to help reduce overall impact. So first thing we want to look at is overall data regarding carbon emissions. And when we look at the fabric industry as a whole, we're looking at the fabric industry produces about 4% of global carbon emissions as a whole. And when we break that down, that's about 1.2 million metric tons of carbon dioxide that is emitted from that manufacturing industry. When we look at the industry as a whole, by 2030, they will produce about twice what is allowable under the Paris agreements for CO2 emissions. So the industry itself, when we look at these CO2 emissions, there's some primary factors that look at it. First thing is we look at is in a cycle of manufacturing production, many of our modern blends use a polyester fabric in that fabric material. Polyester, of course, is produced by petroleum, so you have some of those CO2 emission sources with that production of the oil and transferring that oil into a polyester blend. Then once we get into the manufacturing cycle, you have energy costs associated with the manufacturing of those garments, including overhead electrical, gas, running equipment. And also when we look at CO2 emissions in these calculations, it actually considers transportation emissions also by the workers that actually will run those manufacturing facilities. So you have that component to it. Then after that, you actually will also have the transportation cost and associations there and that CO2 emissions from that value stream. And then once it gets from that transportation, wherever those transportation locations are domestically or internationally, we get into the retail sector of actually selling those products. So when we look at the fabric industry, it's not only just that manufacturing component, but it also looks at all those upstream and downstream sources too. And that's how this value is calculated. So let's take a little bit closer look at some of the environmental components. When we look at that sustainability clothing and the manufacturing process, polyester, of course, as we know, is made from fossil fuels. About 65% of clothing that is now used in modern fabrics contains polyester. And that production of polyester consumes about 70 million barrels of oil per year. And additional fossil fuels are also tied to inputs such as packaging, hangers, and such. With the polyester fabric, we also have potential for microfiber releases. Microfibers will occur when synthetics are washed. These microfiber plastics will release or shed from that fabric into the wastewater. 35% of microfibers found in the ocean are coming from fashion industry, and garments disposed in landfills can also shed these microfibers. So studies, one of these studies produced by Patagonia, estimate that for every 100,000 people, up to 110 kilograms of microfibers would be released daily into local waterways, which is the equivalent pollution of about 15,000 plastic bags. So let's talk about landfills a little bit. When we look at landfills, the main source of textiles in our municipal solid waste for the United States is discarded clothing. Although there is other smaller sources from furniture, carpet, tiles, shoe wares, and other non-durable goods. Landfills receive about 11.3 million tons of municipal solid waste textiles in 2018. That was a 7.7% of all landfills are coming from these clothings. So what are some of the challenges? As an industry, we know the industry provides wealth and well-being for many individuals and many companies. But there are challenges that the industry are going to face. First one is, like we said, the current industry uses a high blend of synthetic non-renewable resources for those fibers, going back to polyester, which is produced from polyester. Average consumer now buys 60% more items of clothing than in 2020, but each garment is kept for half as long. So we're buying more, we're keeping it for a less period of time. Buying habits contribute to about 39 million tons of post-consumer textile waste that is generated at a minimum worldwide each year, primarily in that form of garments. With that, we also see the lifespan of these garments being in the range of 2 to 10 years, with underwear, t-shirts lasting just 1 to 2 years, while suits, coats last for 4 to 6 years. So we're seeing the increased buying habits. We're also seeing a decrease in the usability and length of those garments. Also, if we look in the challenges side, the United States recycling rate for all textiles was about 14.7% in 2018, with 2.5 million tons recycled. That compares to paper and glass and plastic bottles, which all have a recyclability rate of 66, 27, and 29% respectively in the United States. So clothing is clearly lagging behind in the recyclability standpoint. So what are some of these roadblocks when we look at the recyclability of clothing? We've kind of already alluded to it. One is these modern blends. Less than 1% of clothing right now is recycled to make new clothing. Modern garments, like we said, are blended with multiple different types of fabrics. This makes it very difficult to separate them to be effectively recycled. Also, sorting textiles into different fibers, or fabrics, and material types is labor-intensive, slow, and requires a very skilled workforce. Mechanical fiber recycling actually will reduce the fiber length of products, producing a lower quality material. This is what's referred to as a downcycling. So much of today's fabrics and garments that are recycled are downgraded into a lower grade material that is used for insulation, as an example. Also, most of today's textiles to textile recycling technologies can't separate out dyes, contaminants, or even combination of fabrics such as polyester and cotton. So what are the opportunities to reduce? There's several ways that we can look at. From a brand and retailer level, we can look at that cycle of production. So brands and retailers can actually influence across their company, looking at their core values, looking at ways to reduce that global carbon footprint at those individual stream levels. Factory material producers and upstream players can be fully involved and committed to decarbonization programs. But there's also things that citizens can do. When we look at the challenges that we have, there are things that each one of us can do to help reduce this impact. First thing is we can reacquaint ourselves with the garments that we currently own. One survey found that 20% of clothing in the United States is never worn. Second option that you can look at is going secondhand. Secondhand is an easy, affordable way to be more sustainable. It reduces, and it's also much cleaner than recycling because you don't have the energy inputs into that recycling program. Shopping secondhand can also be an excellent way to afford higher quality clothing that will last longer and have a higher resale value, creating a cycle of sustainability. Also, we don't want to leave out the human element of environmental commitment. And a sustainable society takes people, animals, and planet all to work in tandem. Fourth element that we could look at is know how to properly care for your clothing. Many of the modern fibers that are used in clothing, if we don't wash them properly, that will cause them to break down, shed fibers, and cause damage to those clothing at a much higher rate. So extending the life by understanding how to properly wash and care for your fibers is a big element. And the fifth one that we could look at is donating or consignment of reuse of clothing. There are several local resources that can be used to enhance the longevity and thus increasing the sustainability of the clothing. So when we look at local options, there are several options here in our community. These can include Goodwill of the Great Plains, Brookings Domestic Shelter, local places of worship, Salvation Army of Brookings, and Share the Warmth, which has an annual run for winter clothing. So with that, questions that you all may have.
Comments? Bonnie?
When you were doing your research, if you ran across any like public service type slides that perhaps could be put on the city website that could help get this message out?
You know, when I did my research, I did not see anything from a public standpoint. There are a few organizations in the United States. I believe there's one in Minnesota that have some material that's produced, but it wasn't through a government organization per se, but they have organizations that will take clothing and donate it as such. But I did not see anything from local governments, but I didn't also dig that
No,
deep
I
into
mean
it.
like a slide that summarizes some of this information
Oh, excuse me.
to educate the public.
You know, I didn't really find one source that gave all those individual inputs, looking at the stream of production and the inputs from there to what local citizens can do. I didn't see anything of that nature. Not saying that we couldn't create one for our community, but I didn't find one that had all that information.
Yeah, I think it would be nice if there was maybe one or two slides that just maybe summarizes the issue and then what can be done locally that, you know, Chelsea might be able to help with to get onto the city website to help educate the citizens of Brookings.
Mm-hmm. Definitely agree, because the one thing you'll see is there's a lot of information out there, and getting it into a centralized slide or communication points would be very helpful.
Thank you. It was interesting.
You bet, Dr. Spector.
So Jake might want to add to that.
Yeah, we can certainly make the slide deck that was presented tonight available on the city website, as well as the report that was put together by Sustainability Council, as well as potentially even the clip, as I believe this is being recorded. So we can make this all this information right here available on the city website.
That would be great.
Yeah.
Reed, you have a comment?
Yeah, I was just going to say I really appreciate this data and this information. So to bounce off of what Bonnie said, are you planning to do like any public education campaign with this, with the Sustainability Council, like any partnerships, or where would you like this information spread out?
That's a great question. We wanted to get this material developed in front of you all from the board to maybe look at some of these potential options to go forward in providing more additional information to the citizens. So I think there's a lot of good opportunities that we do. We haven't decided on one method yet as a sustainability council.
I'm wondering if in your research campaigns, if there's any examples you found of communities that are kind of taking the next step, maybe from a council level or perspective, to help address some of this besides that educational component.
You know, that's also a great question. We didn't get into that level of research yet, but it definitely could be something that we add on as a continuation to this project. We kind of, first step was to look at understanding the scope and the challenges were there, and then potentially running from there to looking at additional educational options. But that could easily be something that we continue this research on.
That would be wonderful. Thank you for the research that you've already done. I think it's great, even just this presentation, to get that information out to the public. But if there are ways that we can further support kind of combating this issue that's a sustainability issue, I think that we would be definitely willing to listen to potential ideas.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Okay. Not seeing any other comments. Thank you, Albert, and thank the Sustainability Committee for bringing this to our attention.
You bet. Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir. Okay, next presentation is the capital improvement projects. Charlie Richter, our city engineer, will introduce these items for us.
Good evening, Council. I'm here tonight to share with you a public engagement tool the city will be utilizing to inform residents of the upcoming capital improvements projects the city has planned for 2022. The capital improvement project process can take several years of planning and coordination with member utilities such as BMU and Mediacom. To get to the implementation stage, we are excited to get to this point. This engagement tool, called a storybook, thank you, Kwaku. This engagement tool on the city's website on the capital improvements page next week. So let me show you how this storybook works here. On the left-hand side, you can see that the street projects and the various projects are listed on the left-hand side, and a map showing where those projects are in relation to throughout the city. So you can click on this project called 8th Street South, which includes a 2-inch mill and overlay of 8th Street South from Main Ave to east of Maderi. This is part of our overlay project for 2022, and will be done late this summer. There's another project called Jackrabbit Ave over at 7th Street. This is a project we will be doing for a 2-inch mill and overlay on Jackrabbit Ave, including ramps, fillets, valley gutters on 7th Street. This will be done during the summer before school gets back in over at SDSU.
Excuse me, Charlie, can
Yep.
you move the microphone closer?
You know, that's the first time anybody said that they couldn't hear me. So.
Thank you.
Is that better?
Much.
Okay. Another project we have is 3rd Street. This is a project that probably will be one of the more involved projects that we have for this year. It's included in our overlay project. It includes a 2-inch mill and overlay and rebuilding of intersections over on State Avenue and Lincoln Lane. This spans from 17th Ave to 22nd Ave. This project will include closing the street for various points of the summer and early fall to allow for this construction work to occur. Another street, Maderi Ave, which will be one of the bigger ones too. 2-inch mill and overlay on Maderi Ave from 7th Street to 11th Street. This is over by the university and will be accomplished during the summer months before the school's back in. So as you can see, as you click through these various projects, you'll get further information, and the map zooms into the location that that we're speaking about. It includes the anticipated cost for the project and some details about what we are anticipating doing for work over there. One that would want to point out is 17th and 15th, 7th Street and 15th Avenue. Actually, that's mislabeled. It should have been 15th Street South and 7th Avenue. This is an ongoing project from last year where we're involved with connecting the 15th Street through and 7th Avenue through. This is a important project for us as far as for stormwater retention, and it provides us with a parcel for future housing, subsidized housing. So, so as you click through these, you'll see the various projects, and this would be available on the capital improvement page that we were going to have up and running next week. Included in this page would be a interactive tool as well. That would be another link that would be able to provide people to look for updates to the various construction projects around the community, would be updated routinely so that people would have an idea when these projects would occur in their neighborhood. So we're excited about that process. And just to let you know, everybody on this for these projects will be notified prior to construction by mail so that they are informed of the project and the anticipated start date and end date. Is there any
Okay, any questions, comments? Councilmember Wendell.
Thank you, Mayor. I think excited to share it, and I know members of our community will be excited to use it. I wanted to just go back to the last point you made and confirm that I understood it correctly. The one other element will be added, which is the kind of update, giving folks a sense of when the project will begin, and maybe a timeline or what part of the summer they might anticipate that project. It's not there now, but it will be when this goes
Correct.
live. Okay.
Yeah, and we'll be doing a pre-construction meeting with the contractor this week, and we'll have better schedule to share with residents.
Great. Thanks, Charlie.
Any other council member questions or comments? I got one chart. And Main Avenue intersection, that starts when again?
That starts on June.
And we know that there's going to be a detour. How does that going to be set up? Because I just went down that street this morning at 7:55, and there was at least 50 cars heading north on that street. And it's going to be interesting how that gets done.
Yeah, unfortunately, there's not over there. We're going to try to we are timing it so that it's done while school is out. So that will minimize some of the traffic going through the intersection.
Okay.
So, well, we're going to be detouring the traffic starting at 12th Street South and bringing people up 7th Avenue to get to 8th Street South. And then for people moving to the north, you would be directed towards down 7th Avenue and over to 5th Street South and back to Main Avenue.
Or avoid that intersection like the plague.
Correct. And that's the reason why we want to get to get as much notification as possible to let people know that it's coming.
Maybe start looking at alternative routes.
And we'll provide access to all businesses in the detoured area.
So, Street South, how is that detour going to be? Are you going to bring that and swing that down to the south? And how they're going to have to go all the way around over to 12th then and then go up north?
Are you talking about eastbound? Or
8th Street South, but people that are eastbound coming from the west side of Main Avenue.
Yep. So they'll be directed through Indian Hills and
Okay.
back through.
Which swings all the way over to Main Avenue and then
12th Street South.
yeah. Okay.
So unfortunately, it's not an easy
not.
part of town to detour.
It's a tough intersection.
And we're trying to minimize the impact on everyone by doing it this way. Unfortunately, it's no easy way around
It'll
it.
be all better when it's done.
It
the detail.
So we're going to
Okay.
try to get the word out as much as possible. We've got
All right.
message boards up. We've notified everybody within the detoured area by mail, and we are going to have the press release out.
All right. Thank you, Charlie. Any other questions?
Just show the Parks and Rec projects that are on here as well, just an example, like how you could look at those.
So you can click on, like I mentioned before, you can click on some of these locations, and it will zoom to the area where the project will occur. So I clicked on Sexar Dog Park, and I don't know all the specifics, but we have our parks manager here right now that would be able to explain any of the specifics that you want to know about the Parks and Rec project. But this is for a dog park over at Sexar Park. And you can see how it's zoomed into the parcel in which it's going to occur. You look at McClemens Park, where they're anticipating replacing the playground equipment over there, and it zooms into that location. So
I think it's a fantastic.
it is. It is. Any way we can get people more informed of the projects coming up, the better.
All right. Thank you, Charlie. Any other questions or comments? And the presentation of the special assessment policy. Charlie, your city engineer, is going to review that for us also.
Good evening. Here to talk about the special assessment policy that we've drafted that will address financial terms for all special assessments that are not addressed by state statute. South Dakota state statute details the procedure on how to establish a special assessment, but leaves cities to determine the financial terms for those special assessments. To define those terms consistently for projects moving forward, we've drafted this policy that will address special assessments in the future. The financial terms for the assessments defined in the policy are the following. The term of financing shall depend. Sidewalk and alleys would be assessed over 5 years, and roadways and utility work would be assessed over 10 years. This is consistent to the way we've assessed these projects in the past. The annual interest rate charged shall be calculated by the following formula. The Mortgage Bankers Association 15-year fixed rate, which is a well-known standard in the industry, plus 3.5%. In the past, it's been 10% across the board. This is a point that's in between what people can normally see with a 15-year fixed and that 10%. And then any assessment under $1,000 would be assessed in one payment. For sidewalks in the past, it's been set at $300, but that's been the standard for well over 10 years. We thought this would be, it would be time to update this. Just for reference, a sidewalk panel, when being replaced, is about $675. So you're talking about once two sidewalk panels are assessed, it would be over that $1,000 threshold, and someone could have payments over 5 years. So we drafted this policy. It's consistent with state statute, and we've not only to the public moving forward, but for us moving forward as well.
Thank you, Charlie. Councilmember Wendell?
Thank you, Mayor. I understand the rationale behind the 10% we've assessed and the 15-year fixed rate plus the 3.5%. Is the thought behind adding the 3.5% that would cover administrative costs that the city would incur by allowing residents to finance this cost?
Correct. And we are not a financial institution that would do lending, so we're not here to be competitive with banks. So we felt that it would, by adding the 3.5%, we'd cover costs, and that we would be able to provide an outlet for people who may not have good credit.
Mhm.
So we thought it was a good middle ground for the community.
Thank you. That's really what I wanted to affirm, is that we felt like it was covering costs, but it wasn't a revenue generating operation, that 3.5% really would cover anticipated costs, not be burdensome to those that may need to use this as an option.
Correct.
Thank you.
Councilmember Tilton Burn.
I'm curious to know about the minimum threshold change. So it looks like in the past we've that has been at a $300 rate, but now we're proposing to increase that to $1,000. So essentially, anyone whose cost is under $1,000 would be expected to make that payment in one lump sum. Correct? That does concern me a bit. I feel like for some households that are put in a situation where they have to provide payment for these kinds of projects, that could be a really burdensome amount. And so I'm wondering how we got to $1,000 being an appropriate dollar amount.
It was just an idea that we had. It was a policy back well over a decade that we used $300. We felt that with inflation that $1,000 was probably more appropriate. And by the time you add in the interest rate, you compound the interest rate over 5 years for somewhere around 8%. We thought most people would normally just pay any bill under $1,000 in one
Do
payment.
we know what the alternative opportunities are for people to secure funding or loans for these types of things aside from the city? Because I would imagine it would be difficult to secure a loan for these kinds of projects.
I would assume that it would be through either a home equity loan or some other type of loan that would be off your house.
I'm largely supportive of a lot of these changes, but I would say that I would challenge us to take a closer look at that $1,000 amount and consider keeping it at the current $300 rate.
Councilmember Wendell.
My question around the 3.5% was ensuring that we weren't creating undue burden, and lifting from $300 to $1,000 does concern me a little bit for that reason. So I'd want to learn a little bit more before we jump to $1,000, I guess.
Yeah, I've always thought that 10% rate was probably a little bit more like a default rate and kind of a little bit on the punitive side for what the city should have been charging. So I'm glad that we're going away from that. The other comment I would make is when we have and this is kind of my background is it being in finance, but when we have a maximum term of 10 years, I'm not sure why we would be referring to a 15-year index. It seemed like maybe if we were going to do a maximum 10-year term, we would probably use something that's more of a 10-year type cost of funds.
We chose the 15-year fix. We thought standard.
There are a lot of different rates that could be used. There'd be like a Federal Home Loan Bank rate for 10-year cost of funds, that type of thing. Use a margin to that. It's a published rate. Federal Home Loan Bank of Des Moines, fixed rate for fixed rate advances for 10 years. So.
Okay, that's something we'd love to hear about.
Yeah, I just think it makes
information
sense to match it with the term.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Councilmember Collins.
That I support Councilmember Tilton Burns' request. I also wanted to add on that, what are we going to do if somebody just can't afford it? If they're just, I don't know if you said that before, but there are people that have a set budget, and this is something, whether it's $50 a month or $100 a month, they just might not be able to do.
Well, that's something that has to be determined at the resolution of necessity.
Okay.
That is, it's a process that the city goes through for assessing these projects. And that's something that needs to be determined at that point, whether the city wants to go through with that and create special terms for that assessment, or not follow through with the resolution of necessity.
Thank you.
I just wanted to regardless of, you know, what we make as a decision with the city, that there are those social services available for those families, that this would fall under an unexpected or an emergency cost, that there are programs and Brookings that could alleviate that pressure from them. So I think we can understand that that does exist for those families, which is good because these are costs that you're exactly right that some families just simply couldn't afford no matter what. So I'm glad we have those.
And the program.
Member Specker, do you have?
I'm-
The one thing, Guy, would make seem a little steep, but a section of concrete is going to cost 675, and that's probably going to be one of the minimal costs if there's going to be some repairs done. So we may want to hover around the 675 to 700 range because at the most, or at the least, it's going to be one section of a concrete sidewalk. And then when you get to the curb and gutter repair, it's probably going to be a little more expensive than that. Correct. So I just want to throw that one out there. Councilmember Collins.
Wanted to ask, is there a way to get this out to people so that they know where they can go for help on this? And what exactly can they get help with the whole thing? Or I guess I'm not all the way familiar with this.
Councilmember.
Thank you, Mayor. Of any current programs that are specific towards this. And I think a lot of our nonprofits in town, you know, as certain situations arise, some are case by case, some have that emergency funding. I'm just unaware of a specific, you know, this certain repair. So I would have to dive into that a little bit more, and you know, maybe that's education as cases come up in the city after this is passed, or regardless, you know, as these situations come up in the city. I think that's with the nonprofit sector. If that's an increased rise, they can find specific programming or advertise in a different language.
Thank you.
If the situation shows financial burden and there's need on it, staff can refer them to agencies that could take care of that. Councilmember Tilton Burn.
Say the cost of the section of concrete would concern me less than what we set as a rate. Even if our threshold is $300, I'm still comfortable with that. I would be largely because I think that for individuals who can cover the one-time expense of $600 to $900, I think they'll be likely to just pay that amount and not take advantage of a program like this, because this program still charges an interest rate. So I think for those who are able to pay that upfront cost, they'll do that. And so I would still be favorable at keeping that threshold at $300, because if there are instances where the sidewalk can be mitigated in an expense lower than that, I would still want to be able to provide this opportunity to utilize this program.
Okay. Jake?
Charlie, thank you. Council, thank you for all of your comments here tonight. Certainly appreciate those. From a staff perspective, we're very comfortable lowering that minimum threshold. That's not a concern for us at this time. We can certainly go lower on that. So appreciate the feedback on those comments, and certainly want to be aware of those who may have challenges coming up with the funds for some of these projects. As you noted, there is an interest rate on this, so we can provide that financing. So we're very happy to lower that rate. So that's a great direction, and we certainly appreciate that. Going back to Councilmember Avery's comment on the rate, I just kind of want to go back to that on a high level and say that we wanted to really find an easily understood and well accepted financing term. And frankly, I just looked it up right now. The daily rate at that 4.8, or the daily rate of the 15-year mortgage through the Mortgage Bankers Association is at about 4.8% right now. So tacking our 3.5 on there would put us at 8.3 if we were to do a project tomorrow, say, utilizing this rate. From a staff perspective, and just being conscientious of time, if there's a desire from council for us to explore other rates, we certainly can. But I think the overall goal of this is finding a rate that's well established, market driven, getting us below that 10% threshold, but also not competing with the private sector and encouraging folks to utilize our local institutions. So I just wanted to clarify that point, if there's a strong desire from council for us to find an alternative rate, because that will take additional staff time, and we really were just trying to find something that's well accepted and understood by many folks.
Charlie. Appreciate
Thank
your
you.
time. And then our next presentation, Jake, our Assistant City Manager, and Eric Rangel will present this item on the American Rescue Plan Act funding and what we got for information from our surveys that were taken.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. The City of Brookings American Rescue Plan Act funding allocation is $4.4 million. $2.2 million was received in September of 2022, and a second deposit of $2.2 million will be received in September of this year. The city completed multiple surveys of key community stakeholders, residents, and business owners to identify community needs and funding priorities. Bonnie, can you advance us a couple slides? Was a group called POCO, and they had completed 2 surveys on behalf of the city, reaching out to our residents as well as our business community. We had sent our residential survey out to 4,000 individual homes, and of those, we got 310 responses back, and that was a satisfactory result to be deemed a statistically valid survey on that side. We had also received 37 business surveys that were completed, and those were sent to a total of 543 different businesses in the community. From a very high level, we wanted to show council as well as members of the public what we had heard in terms of the priorities of our community on the residential side as well as the business owner side for the utilization of the ARPA funds that had come into the city. So when you see these percentages after these priorities, those are the people who indicated that these are essential or very important to fund these areas. So 74% of respondents on the residential side indicated that behavioral health care was essential or very important, 64% towards affordable housing, and then 63% towards healthy childhood environments, which is commonly associated with child care opportunities. We saw very similar things on the business side for this survey, 75% coming in at behavioral health care, 72% at healthy childhood environments, and then 66% at economic aid to households for housing, food, or other hardships, which again gets at your affordable housing issue. So really, in this results of this survey from a very high level, what we're seeing is both residents and the business community prioritizing mental health, housing, affordability, as well as childcare or healthy childhood environments. Next slide, please. An additional tool that we utilized was through Baker Tilly, a different group, and this was a targeted community stakeholder where we engaged members of the nonprofit community, economic development community, as well as city partners and city officials as well. This funding operated a little bit differently. Each participant who took this survey had $1 million to allocate, and then they were able to select which areas they wanted to fund, and then how much of their $1 million they would kind of give to each of those areas. So what we did there is we saw, we put into this slide how many selected the item, and then if you average out their allocation across the 15 million, what each gave to it. So for childcare, there were 6 selected that highlighted that item. The average allocation would have been about 160,000, and so on and so forth. So childcare, stormwater, affordable housing, mental health, and then a couple other items related to cybersecurity and broadband. Again, from a very high level, whether we look at members of the residential community, members of the business community, as well as our key stakeholders that we identified in the community, we're seeing themes reoccurring of childcare, affordable housing, and mental health. So that's really what we're seeing from a high level. We wanted to present this information to City Council, as well as members of the public, that we have gotten a fairly consistent response to our surveys that we looked at in different groups that we targeted through that, that those are the top 3 priorities that have kind of risen to the top for the desired utilization of our ARPA funds. With that, I would turn it over for any questions. Or Eric, do you have anything you wanted to add?
Any comments or questions? Okay. I know that's going to be, all right, there we go. Councilmember Wendell.
Thank you, Mayor. Remind us, Eric, what our time frame is when the dollars have to be either obligated or expended?
That is a great question because the timeline changed. So technically there is no timeline anymore. The guideline changed for entities that receive $10 million or less, and we fall under that statute, and we are able to claim the use of the funds through government services, which that means that we don't have to spend this with a determined timeline.
I asked that question not, I think there are immediate needs, so I'm not advocating for us to stretch out our expenditure of these dollars, but I am somewhat relieved to hear that because it means that we could establish some type of program and know that we could continue to support it over time if the dollars weren't expended within the next 2 fiscal years, say. So I guess that's good
Yes,
news from my
and
perspective.
let me clarify that the rules didn't change. We're just able to justify the use of funds through government services, so that frees up the funds from that timeline.
Can you remind us what funding is for the city?
Yeah, so it was $4.4 million total.
And how much of that have we allocated already?
So we have, already allocated for city-related operations is $1.4 million. $742,000. And then we're proposing to allocate $1.4 million of that for the Public Safety Center, which then leaves $1.7 million for other economic development or redevelopment or housing or any of these projects.
So after the Public Safety Center, we have 1.7 remaining in this fund. I'm wondering if there might be, because I think there's a lot of questions in the public and probably also within the council about how much funding we have total, what projects have already been utilized with this funding, and then how much is remaining. And I'm wondering if there is a way, you do a great job with presenting our budget and things like that. I'm wondering if there's a way that we can easily present this information as well, whether that be an infographic or a place on the website where we can kind of just track ARPA independently, because I do think it's a topic that a lot of us have been kind of looking at both in the public and on council.
Sure, we'll find a way.
Great, thank you.
Councilmember Dorn.
Thank you, Mayor. Stormwater, I thought that was interesting on this specific survey that it had a higher allocation. Can you explain how that would play plan that is being developed right now? And yeah, just kind of like if you have any context within that stormwater point, please.
You want to take that one?
I can take that question, Councilmember Duran. Well, but the guidelines for ARPA have changed over time. So when we had completed, frankly, both of these surveys, there were more restrictions that were placed onto this funding at the time of this. So that's why we really wanted to engage and see, based on these areas or pots of money where we could allocate, where those priorities are. But as Eric had talked about in some of the answers he had given, the ARPA guidelines have changed to the point where anybody who or any entity receiving less than 10 million, when we're at 4.4, you don't have to follow those strict pots anymore. So our revenue is much less restricted now than at the time of taking these surveys. So those guidelines had changed. So at that time, infrastructure and different pockets of money were going to be a higher priority. So we kind of operated within those frameworks when we put these surveys out. But now that it's less restricted, I'm not sure that stormwater would be as high a priority for ARPA dollars as it was at that time, just because we have more flexibility now.
Any other comments or questions? Thank you, Eric. Jake? Oh, Councilmember Wendell. Yes, please.
Of course. I just wanted to gave us tonight was exactly what we needed to see. I would encourage residents to visit the agenda for tonight's meeting, because the full report I thought was really compelling, and it breaks it down by the resident survey, the businesses survey, and those key community stakeholder surveys. And it really unpacks what each of these topics meant, what folks might have been thinking, the percentage of respondents that indicated support in any one area. So if you want to follow some of these numbers a bit further, the links that are on the agenda, I think, would be helpful to tell the picture, or to tell the story even more.
Okay. I think we're done this time. Eric, Jake, thank you very much. And then we'll talk about next week's meeting. We have a first reading on budget amendment number 6. We've got bid awards for 4 different items: fire department training tower, the landfill hay land lease, RFP for phase 2 of 22nd Avenue reconstruction project. Charlie might be giving us a little information on that. And then Swiftel Center NLFX audio, and a bid on that. And then public hearing on off-sale malt and wine licenses for Sodexo, which is the new provider for the food service up at the university. And then second reading number 5, budget amendment, and then the amendment on the vegetation changes ordinance. And is there anyone that wants to bring up a subject or comment? I'm going to throw it out there. Councilman Wendell.
I would like for us, I'll make a motion that at our next meeting, we consider a resolution to temporarily suspend the permitting fees related to projects related to damage from the recent storm.
Okay. Second on that. Second, is there any other council member discussions or questions on this item?
Can I ask for a couple of points of clarification? So I think we had discussed potentially a 180-day moratorium that would sunset so that we would resume normal order on our permitting process after hopefully folks have an opportunity to address damage. I don't know if 180 days is the exact place we'll land, but that seems to be where the conversation was. This would be designed for things like signage and roofing and siding projects. Folks have already gone through the permitting process for these types of projects. These would be folks that would be replacing a replica of the sign, same dimensions, same material, same locations, to maybe ease some of the burden of the permitting fee that they'd have to incur a second time just to replace the same version. One question I had was, are we able to do this through an emergency version of a resolution that we could take final action next week, or what would our time frame look like?
I think that we could waive the fee permit applications that date back to the storm damage, and we would have the legal authority to set that time frame so that if there are some applications that have already been submitted and permit fees that are being considered or perhaps have been paid, that we can implement the resolution all the way back to the date of the assuming the council approves the resolution back to the date of the storm.
So the point of action next week, the impact of the decision would still be felt starting last Thursday moving forward, essentially.
Correct. And we'd have the legal, particularly under the emergency provisions of state statutes.
Can you affirm something else for us? And maybe, I think there was conversation around one of two lanes here, either circumventing the permitting process in its entirety for these types of projects, or just focusing in on waiving the fees. Can you speak to the wisdom of still maintaining a permitting process in some form?
Absolutely. My recommendation would be that we waive the fees for these individuals that are coming forward to ease that financial burden. But I would recommend that we maintain the permits just because there is value in them still pulling those permits, and then we have a record of the work that's performed. So really that just becomes an exercise in documentation, and we're able to maintain that. If there's any ever questions in the future about when something went up or timing, or if there's anything related to construction and there's questions related, we then at least have a piece of documentation that we can reflect on. So my recommendation would be to certainly waive the fees or consider that, but maintain the permitting process just so we keep that documentation.
I have to tend to agree with Jake on that because they passed a ordinance to require a permit fee for roofing because we had contractors coming into town that were not doing it correctly, and the contractors in the town wanted to make sure that residents got what they deserved as far as a quality project. So yes, I think we still need to go through the permit process, but waive the fee. Councilmember Tilton Burn.
Just a couple to businesses, or would this be any permitting around replacing structures?
The businesses, it would be.
And it would be limited to effects of the storm, correct?
Correct.
Thank you.
And there may be such as churches and other types of organizations that have building damage as well. So I would assume that we'd want to include those.
Yes, and I am favorable to having it.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. One question is what if we have like another storm down the road? I mean, but we know what happened like a week ago. So let's say something happens 2 weeks from now. Would it be 180 days from each storm? Or or
Well,
each storm, or how would
I'm
we do that?
envisioning that the resolution that would just reference the specific May 12th storm event. And I don't want to talk about another storm at this point.
I don't either. Maybe I shouldn't have
But
brought it up.
material designed to just have the applicant indicate that this damage stemmed from the May 12th event.
Okay, so question, Councilmember Dorn.
Thank you. Myself, but I'm just wondering how the storm damage would be documented. Would it be an insurance claim, or would that be something that we'd have to explore? Like, what would classify storm damage for that event, or how could they prove that?
Probably not a great deal of documented evidence of the cause, but a certification on the application for the permit that indicates that this damage did stem from the May 12th storm event.
Okay, so question is, Jake, do you have enough to go on to prepare us for a resolution on this?
I believe we do.
Please call the roll.
Collins,
Aye.
Duran,
Aye.
Niemeyer,
Aye.
Specker,
Aye.
Tilton Burn,
Aye.
Wendell,
Aye.
Avery.
Aye.
Motion passes. Any other comments or questions? Something that somebody wants to add or make a comment? I would like to say that we are really proud of the city staff and how things have been performed. Last Friday, the emergency center ran like clockwork. We had all the streets cleaned off by 5 o'clock, and we all had power by about 11 o'clock. Is that correct, Bonnie? Because I think
Yes,
you were one of the
30
last ones that
hours
said that
later.
you had it. So hopefully people didn't suffer too much from what we had for energy loss or losses from, say, the refrigerator or coolers. And then the other thing I want to say tonight is we have a new reporter from the paper here tonight. If you want to come up and introduce yourself, sir, I'd appreciate it. Yeah? We want to know who's writing our stories. Mike, and put your name out there. That way everybody knows who you are. Here. Yep. Green light on. Yep. There you go.
Sorry. Mondell Keck. I'm actually originally from the Brookings area. Graduated from Sioux Valley High School, May of 1993. SDCU graduate, May of 98. But like I've been telling all the folks I've been asking, when you're $20,000 in student debt and you have a job offer from the newspaper in Aberdeen, you don't ask questions. You just take the job. And so that's where I've been for the last 23 years and change as a copy editor up there and that kind of stuff. And then the industry's been changing. So I had an opportunity to come back down here to reestablish my roots here in the Brookings area and register an opening, and here I am tonight. So hopefully I can make everyone proud.
Thank you. Welcome home.
Thank you, sir.
Sir, questions? Jake?
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to put a plug. Visit our city website and check out our real-time tracker for storm cleanup. Crews are at about 16.5%. They've cleared a good chunk of the middle of the community already. So again, thank you so much to everyone that's been out there working hard to clear our community. We do have free dumping for Brookings County residents at the landfill through this week. So if you have storm debris that you can haul out there, we ask you to do so. That does alleviate the burden on our crews. We've also opened up our Citizens Campus for free dumping for contractors over the next couple of weeks as well, and ask them to haul as much as they can because it does alleviate that burden from our staff as well. So thanks to all of our residents at home for their patience, and thank you to everyone who's been getting out and helping your neighbors during this difficult time.
Just have one last comment for any residents volunteers with the cleanup assistance, as well as just to document that storm damage. That's how we unlock those extra dollars for the community. So it's really important to get that data with the helpline center. So dial 211 for storm damage or for any assistance needed. Thank you.
So moved.
Second.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.